I can say that I tell a lot of people about how quickly Sarge can do it.
Yeah, it seems to be Ryan's pitting everyone against each other to who can scan the fastest.
I
uh,
I don't know if I'm pitting.
Well, hi everyone. Welcome to our December roundtable discussion. We have a few good scans again, just like last week. So, to those of you who were not here, not last week, but last month, we'll start with a short introduction about customer support and our team, and then we'll get into really conversational flow. And we have our very own Ryan Darcy here to go through those scans, and it's more of an open discussion. So if these scans were ones that you submitted, feel free to pipe in with any patient context that may be missing or client context, and we'll have some fun with it. So without further ado, just introducing you to our support team. So on here we have Shannon Cotnam in the middle here. She's disappeared from her screen, but she is Ryan's executive assistant and many, many other things. So she is responsible for putting these meetings together. Myself in the middle, I'm Claire Griffin. I'm the clinical implementation specialist, also known as the NeuroCatch report guru on the slide here. And then I don't think on the call, but our technical support lead, Christopher Geyer, is also Christopher and I monitor the customer support inbox for anything that comes up. So never hesitate to reach out if you need us. Just a couple updates coming into December. We do have customer support drop-in hours. You can come in for clinical or technical support. Christopher and myself are both there for anything like peak select or, my cap is broken or any kind of support that you might need. Those are Mondays at 9 a.m. Pacific and Fridays at 12 p.m. Pacific. And our last occurrence of 2025 will be December 22nd, leading into the holiday break. And then speaking of holiday break, our phone lines will be closed between Christmas Eve and January 1st. However, we will be monitoring emails. So if anything urgent comes up, just shoot us an email and we will get back to you as soon as we can. And then there will be no roundtable meeting like this for the month of January. However, our next roundtable will be Thursday, February 12th. And there we're going to be doing a virtual walkthrough of our 2.3 software update, including our NeuroCatch Connects system, which is a way that you can import and export and share scans with external reviewers. So we'll be doing a demo of that, of our new report, and the new graphical user interface of our software update. So stay tuned to our January and February clinical newsletters for registration links for that. And knock on wood, somewhere around that time, we're also going to have the software update available for all of you. Hopefully a little bit before that so you can follow along with the demo, but we will see. And I think that's it. So without further ado, let's jump into our first scan.
Is it safe to assume, Claire, you're loading the scan or Shannon is?
I was actually going through a slideshow this whole time and just realized that I wasn't sharing it. So here you go.
Fabulous. Okay, so just a little bit of commentary ahead of the time. Claire and Shannon and I are loving how this roundtable is working. It's very organic. It has incredible participation from a lot of the folks that are on this call. We are really, I think, just being very listening and conscientious to what is the most value. So it is also kind of incorporating, well, it's talking about scans from a didactic perspective. I think we're also building in or thinking about building in kind of more of a clinical rounds component as well. And certainly, I think the main thing I'd add is we would really encourage feedback at this moment in time. We want to make this what is the most useful. So for anyone who wants to contact, feel free to contact any of us. Certainly, as everyone knows, Claire and Shannon are really reliable. So send us an email and ask us first or pitch us specific ideas so that we can continue to kind of refine this along the way. And then this scan we'll jump off with And this is a scan that I'll work on with Claire. Claire, are you comfortable giving a background of this scan? It feels appropriate.
Yes. So this is a scan that I've actually done on myself with my at-home scanner. So the 27-year-old, said 27-year-old is myself. Our scan 7 on the top here is just a baseline, me taking the scan as I normally would. And scan 8 is actually one that I was setting up the scan as you normally would, but I was actually scrolling on social media for the second scan. So intentionally not paying attention and just having a little bit of fun with the scanner to see sort of what I could get out of it. So I typically am one that has a high P300 amplitude. So just kind of orienting everyone to the scan results summary. The 10.91 is not really, it's pretty typical for me. So the fact that that's out of range is not something that's unexpected to see.
I think we're jokingly calling this the TikTok pre-post scan.
Yeah, the
So
TikTok.
yeah, you can see in the radar plot that there was a reduction in the second scan in green in terms of the amplitudes and the slowing of latencies. And then as I've seen, Claire, there's a number of us who have self-scanned a number of times. And so in Claire's case, she does tend to have a larger P300. So maybe we can go to the waveforms. So this is quite, I saw this during one of our usual meetings, and this is quite a really neat comparison. The top scan, of course, being focused attention, and the bottom scan being the same scan shortly after, 10 minutes after, while scrolling social media. And this is just showing the N100. So you can see it had even an effect on sensory processing. Couple things that jump. She has, if you look at the standard waveforms on both scans, they're actually they repeat one another fairly well. But her reaction to the deviant waveform did change. It changed not only in the latency, adding another 20 milliseconds, but also you can see in the waveform shape or morphology and the amplitude, reducing slightly in amplitude. And then, of course, you can see to come if we go to the P300 that there was quite a lot of change in the P300. So I imagine that's the next slide. This is a fun one to talk about in terms of peak selecting. Claire and I worked on this one a fair amount. The algorithm actually on the top scan originally grabbed the first peak. I think thinking it was a P3A. We immediately identified, as everyone knows, I always say compare apples to apples. So I identified that we were introducing a kind of a latency, false latency delay if we were selecting different peaks. And so this is where what became interesting is actually, again, looking at the standard tones. You can see that stable peak in the standard tones, and then you can see that first peak in the deviant tones is kind of occurring right after. That's how we used it to anchor that first peak was. We're making an educated guess that might be the P200 and not the P3A, but either way, we also, as seeing enough of Claire's scans, knew that she had a fairly large, so if you want to call that second peak the P3B, she had a fairly large P3B, so we elected to ultimately peak select to that one on the first scan for a apples to apples comparison. And another thing you can see in both of these cases, which is actually interesting, is you do see there is some changes there where the 256 shows a tighter variability, but in general, the variability was pretty replicated in both the N100 and the P300. Nothing really wildly changing there. So let's go to the N400. Same observation, just at the waveform level. There's much better waveforms in the first scan than the second scan. And then this was an interesting one because selecting the N400 in the first scan was pretty straightforward. We're giving it up to the peak ahead of the main N400 peak, largely because that's probably the sort of the first demonstration of the deviation. Could be based on the sound, the PMN, as we talked about last time. But it's, I think, a very good indication of kind of where the separation was occurring. When you go down to the second scan during scrolling social media, that gets more tricky. And I really liked, Claire, how you broke this down. The first thing is that she selected the maximum negativity peak in peak select. So she took the maximum peak. But if you actually look at the matching words or the congruent words in purple, you can see that there's actually a peak just ahead of the peak selected, and then you can see that same peak is just ahead of the peak that Claire selected. So in what I would call a tricky N400 to score, I think these were well scored. And of course, what they're reflecting, which is what the waveform reflects, is a drop in amplitude and a delay in latency in cognitive processing. So for all of those who have teens who scroll social media, I do it too, so I don't want to pick on teenagers, but as if you're a parent out there, this is a good scientific proof that you might not be at your top cognitive processing when you're on your phone.
Yeah, no distractions.
Yeah. Any questions on that before we go to the next one?
I have a quick question. It's Jelly.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we look back at the first scan, I might have missed it, but is there a reason as to why that second bump around that 450-ish mark in the first scan is not the N400? I might have missed it, but
Are you talking about scan 8,
that bump,
Jelly?
yeah, that one. The first scan for the N400, yeah.
Yeah, so the N400 is, as I think many people know, is kind of got the driving phonological mismatch negativity, and then the second bump where Claire's highlighting is the proper traditional N400. What we have seen is that if you're using peak select, often the algorithm is actually tuned to where Claire, it's the constraints of the algorithm are tuned to where Claire is indicating. So Jelly, that second bump you could say is the conventional or traditional N400. In a lot of the data that are coming down, we are allowing override with peak select because you can see that the earlier separation is still a part of the component. So it's the PMN essentially is kind of similar to the P3A. We're giving you the faster component because we would rather accurately record someone's fastest cognitive processing departure than necessarily get a later bump that makes them think that it's slower than it really is. So that's effectively why the peak select is there. In cases, it is interesting, and we are tuning the algorithm to get better and better at this. But in cases where it's clearly a PMN or the phonological peak, and it's much smaller, and the N400 is much bigger, we will still default to the N400. But if you're showing separation early due to just hearing the unexpected sound, I think our general in the field and generally we try to tag that peak because that's a more representative peak of you detecting the difference.
Gotcha.
Great question. Great
Thank
question.
you.
Yes,
Yeah.
and in the same way that I typically have a stronger P300B than A, I typically also have this PMN feature in a lot of my scans, so it felt natural to select it here too.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you, guys.
So I got a question. Claire, on the second test, you were just scrolling through social media, or were you still trying to perform the task while you were scrolling?
I was kind of trying to hear it in the back of my mind, but I was kind of trying to not pay attention to it. So I did have the headphones in and I could hear the audio, but I wasn't really like paying any active attention to it. But every once in a while, I could kind of feel my brain drifting a little bit to like trying to pay attention to it and then just trying to really mess with it and be on my phone just to see what would happen.
But you weren't deliberately thinking about the match mismatch,
No,
correct? Okay.
No.
So it raises the question for me, how much of the variation, when we see these abnormal results, how much of the variation is from a patient underperforming at the task, and how much of it is them not performing the task at all? Do you get what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
Because if you were to say to me, Claire, like I was doing the task, I was trying to do the task, but and you weren't visibly scrolling through social media, but let's say you were distracted during the task, we could see a result like this and attribute it to a poor performance.
So I think it's a really good question. As I'm sure people have heard me say, ultimately the waveforms are the waveforms. The physiology is the physiology, and it is reporting back. I think there's no question an overlap of performance with, let's say, more organic cognitive impairment, which is at the essence of your question. Is what's the boundary and relationship between the two? And feel free, by the way, to correct me if I got that question wrong. I think the my response to that would be, we know I've often said that this is a cognitive test. So if you have a sleep when you're doing it, you're not going to get your best result. So we can't, just logically, we can't say that performance on a cognitive test is never going to be a factor. It will always be a factor. It will always be reflected in the physiology. Um, does that mean that that it's going to be confusing in terms of, is this a performance issue or do I have somebody with cognitive impairment? For sure, there's going to be some interesting gray areas. I think anyone who would say there won't be would be not being, really authentic to the situation. However, I would say that there are a couple really important things that we're seeing come out of the field and experience in using the tool. The first is that the you would never ever interpret NeuroCatch in itself, right? So you're always interpreting it within an array of clinical, pieces of information, for lack of a better term. You have the ability to repeat scans, and you have the ability to interrogate the difference of that. So it's very similar to like when we do MRIs and you ask someone not to move, and then you get like a blurry scan and you're like, okay, wait a minute, I think you were moving. We're going to have to repeat the scan. So the way I would answer that in a concrete, practical terms of how to use the scanner day to day, in a case like this, it's pretty clear the physiology is showing a performance-related impact due to distraction. And you're seeing that. We don't have any clinical concerns about Claire because we have the baseline. If Claire had said, listen, I just got in a car accident or something horrible like that, I would watch to see if this is sort of let's just use the N400. When she's distracted, she's as slow as 450. If I now see that she's really trying hard and her N400 is much more delayed in the 600 range, I am definitely clinically thinking that that might be more related to the car accident than it would be necessarily distraction. And I would know, obviously, clinically that I wasn't asking her to scroll TikTok at that time. So I don't know if that's helpful, but at the end of the day, the good thing that I will say, NeuroCatch gives you the physiological response. Our job is to use that to deduce what exactly are we looking at. Are we looking at a performance difference? Were they drowsy? Were they sleepy? Or were they not doing the task? Or is this legitimately something of cognitive impairment? And the latter does tend to differentiate itself. We've seen in the field.
Yeah. Could you go back
Great
to the radar
question.
plot for one sec? Thank you. Yeah, you did get it, by the way. So it's interesting that the latencies were actually improved pretty much straight across the board, except for the P300. Especially considering she's not performing the task.
The latencies across the board were slower.
So, sorry, it's the second scan. Yeah. Sorry, I mixed up the scans. My bad.
Yeah, I do that too. The colors, the order of the colors.
Yeah, I mixed up the colors. Yeah. Thank you.
No worries.
All right. Let's jump into our next case.
Okay. Well, actually, I don't know if this could have been a better transition. Thanks, Claire. We've got a 23-year-old motor vehicle accident, no recollection of the crash. Subjective reports of difficulty with attention, concentration, multitasking, light sensitivity, and reports of PTSD. So, I mean, I'm seeing this effectively at the same time as everyone else is. I may have seen this before, but I've definitely lost track. You got two scans, multi-scan comparison, scan one, scan two. Um, Typically, my suspicion is because I suspect I know which clinic this came from. There's actually an attempt to induce cognitive fatigue. So my guess is that this was a scan early on, and then there was a sort of an intervention or clinical session, and then a scan at the end of the session to look at it in terms of follow-up. I'll jump in if there's anyone this is a scan and you want to correct me, please do correct me. Otherwise, I'm just reading this blind. But you can see first and foremost in the radar plot, there's kind of a unique radar plot presentation. And in particular, what's kind of jumping out is you've got a higher than normal N100 amplitude. You've got, trending towards a fairly large P300 amplitude with a delayed latency in the P300. And then it's a relatively preserved or fast N400 latency. So the radar plot is basically sort of showing that. And if you look at the differences between the two, there's mildly larger N100 and then some improved changes in both the P3 latency and the N400 amplitude. So that's what we would expect to see. So let's jump into the waveforms and see what we see. Yeah. So good, first of all, good overall good replication. We always talk about these as think of them like your signature. You can see the waveform is replicating fairly good from shot to shot. It is definitely an improved N100 in terms of the sharpness of the peak. And also, if you look at the ellipse, it's tightened up in terms of variability. And there is the N100 is probably not too remarkable, other than it is at 9.74 microvolts. It's fairly large. In a clinical population, we do tend to see that with sort of noise sensitivity. So that could be related to kind of sensitivity for TBI noise sensitivity. And I would query that to the clinician, just asking about background. Maybe go to the next part of the waveform. P3. Yeah, so this is interesting because just looking at the waveform physiology in the second one, it actually does look a little better. Its latency is faster. The waveform, the actual waveform shape and morphology looks better. And you can see that the variability in latency tightened up. That's why the ellipse is tighter, and it looks more like a football standing on its end. So just as a straight up objective read, the attentional processing and attentional switching in the second scan looks to be improved. Next part. The N400. Yeah, so neither of these N400s, I would say, would be really good textbook N400s. They're not, they're still within the realm of looking at it in terms of the N400 peak. You see a clear peak preceding that, the P200, which suggests that you're still looking at a solid response, but it's quite drifty and noisy. And there you can see that it's showing kind of a fairly rapid deviation in the incongruent condition at about 318 and 304 milliseconds. This is a young individual, so it's not uncommon to have fast processing that fast in a younger individual. The overall waveform shape is replicating itself, but I would say personally, I don't think that the N400 has any remarkable changes. Differences of about 14 milliseconds from shot to shot are not something I would put in as a clinically meaningful change in latency. And the response is pretty stable shot to shot. So in this case, the biggest thing that you can see is a slightly elevated N100 and an improved P300 in the second scan. And if this is anyone's case, feel free to jump in and tell me where I got it all wrong. Next scan.
Sorry, just a quick question again, if that's all right. What would you find as clinically significant in the differences between the N400 latencies? Like, what would you call clinically significant here?
I would tend to not make a big deal of anything that is not 50 milliseconds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Or greater for N400. Keep in mind that for the latency ranges for clinically significant or meaningful changes are the smallest for the N100, and then it goes up. So it goes from N100 to P300 to N400, but there's more variability in timing for the later cognitive processing components.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So the amplitude is a funny one because, Marcus and I have talked about this in certain circumstances. Contextually, traditionally would be looked at as, well, it's greater recruitment of neurons, and it could be seen as a sort of more robust response. However, in some ways, contextually, it almost seems like a more effortful response. Would you say that difference in the amplitude from the first to the second would be evidence of like increasing effort?
It's interesting. You're absolutely right. When we teach the difference between latency and amplitude, latency is simple, right? It's like, 100-yard sprint. It is, as long as the peak is properly scored, if it's faster, it's faster. Amplitude is more, I describe it as more rich clinically, and you nailed it in what you said. We know it's pyramidal cells firing in synchrony creates larger amplitudes. However, you can have, as you know, and Marcus knows, you can have where that's actually clinically relevant to the situation, like a slightly elevated N100 or P300. In cognitive fatigue, and specific to your question, it's early. I wouldn't want to go in 100 on exactly how amplitude is reflecting, let's say, like effortful cognitive processing. We have seen where in the cases where it's kind of like a pre and post after a session, there's an overall drop in the power of the amplitude in the second scan, and that's caught my eye, and I'm kind of tracking that. But similarly, I've also seen where if somebody is recruiting a ton of, like, let's use acute concussion with the original Mayo papers, the brain recruits more cortex to basically homeostatically compensate. This is our working theory, and still goes longer. So amplitude is a tricky situation. It's always interesting. In this case, if I was to reflect on this, I don't want to say that there's more change in amplitude. I mean, there is slightly more change from shot 1 to shot 2, but I would want to see a repeat scan and a repeat pattern to really sort of say that the second scan is showing attenuated amplitude because they're cognitively fatigued. I would feel that would be overreading.
Okay, it's funny that you said that because there's an interesting phenomenon with EMG, because with EMG, you're looking at neural drive. You're not actually looking at the amount the muscle's contracting, which under controlled conditions will be the same. But as someone fatigues, the neural drive increases, but the muscular output decreases. So it almost tied in with something you said there, that as they're fatiguing, you could potentially see an amplitude going up for the equal degree of performance, essentially.
Yep. Yeah, I have I know this is on recording, but I have my own scan where we had people over and had too much wine, and I scanned on Saturday, and I was feeling hungover, and I absolutely expected my worst scan ever, and I got my best scan ever. And my speculation is my brain compensated and homeostatically over-delivered performance because I had disadvantaged it through my night before actions. So I think the physiology is a physiology. The point is, when it comes to like concerns of overreading, I always caution whatever the waveform is telling you, we have to check against our subjective impression of what we expected to see. and actually just try and understand it clinically in terms of why did that happen based on first principles of what drives the amplitude and what drives the latency.
Thank you.
Oh, cool. Okay. Multi-scan, 3 scans, 22-year-old athlete. This looks like something that came from our awesome collaborators out in Australia. I'm guessing just because I know that they were scanning people. This is really interesting to this group. They are the first to scan acute concussion with more than one time point to look at the trajectory of recovery in athletes. And so this is actually showing you time points at day 2 and day 5 of post-concussion. And if you just scroll, day 2 seems to have the largest sort of waveform change that we're going to expect to see. And it looks like day 5 is looking very similar to day to baseline. So let's go to the waveforms. And so remember, scan 2 is your baseline. And I know from other work that we tend to see the biggest post-injury effect on average at day 2, which would be scan 3. So we're not seeing a tremendous ton of difference in the N1. Oh yeah, the N100 latency actually changed from 126. So that's cool. Went from 90 to 126. That's very significant. Yeah.
And you can see with the standard tone and the deviant tone, it became not aligned.
Yes. Yeah. So that would so I always think of the thanks, Sarge, because I know this is your contribution, so appreciate it. This is demonstrating central auditory processing impacts of concussion, day 2. Now, what's interesting, if we go to the P300, same waveform, we'll see it again. Here, the waveform in terms of timing isn't changing a ton. I mean, 218 to 240, 230, 240. It's not changing remarkably if you look at overall morphology, but you could be looking at where it's actually evolving back to its baseline morphology. And if we had other data points, I'd want to see if it became kind of both an A and a B at later data points. You can see that the scan 2, it definitely seems to have basically embedded the A and the B components inside, caused a slight latency delay, but I wouldn't overread that latency delay because it could just be because the 2 components are driving into one peak. But then you do see, that it's starting in scan 3 to kind of show more sort of differentiation of the bifurcated morphology. So what's interesting to me in that is the shape of the peak more so than the timing and the amplitude. Although it could be the case that you've got, because you're going from 6.9 to 9.9, that you still have an elevated amplitude post concussion. So I wouldn't rule that out, but I would track it to see if that's the case. Let's see the N400. Oh, and then of course, one other thing, you saw the variance jitter change up there. So in scan 2, the ellipse is no longer as tight. So there's probably more variance jitter, which would be consistent and correlate with sort of an immediate acute concussion type of an impact. Next. All right. Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of I think everyone can see this. There's quite a remarkable change in the N400. You get the P200 early on, so you're not questioning if that second day scan is necessary. This goes to the earlier question. The P200 is intact, so you're not necessarily questioning if there was a change in how they did the task. Because it's quite replicated across the 3 scans, but clearly you can see that the waveform morphology of the incongruent N400 response is definitely changed. So that would be quite strongly indicative of kind of a post-concussive cognitive impairment. And then by scan 4, it is actually coming back, and even arguably looks better by a significant amount. So that's interesting. Yep. Great case, Sarge.
So, so I think a lot of people will look at that and go, oh, there was one N4, and suddenly we've got a couple of extra bumps in the second scan. So you can see an extra peaks introduced there. So the selection based on lowest amplitude is what we usually run with. And then Ryan, we talk about that P&M and the actual N4 separating. So it's still, the brain still understands that it doesn't sound right, but the actual point to decision and cognitive processing that it isn't right lengthens. So the gap between the P&M and the actual decision broadens. Sometimes we see that as a small peak on the way to a larger peak in one continuous motion that still is that delayed over 500 milliseconds. Sometimes we see it break into these two peaks.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the other thing is, remember, with what we did using the vital sign framework, our job is to characterize normal and healthy normal profiles to the best of our ability. So when you get pathology, you will get variability of the pathology. So for example, you would want to be a little careful of overreading the physiology, with a differential being that, in fact, there was an entire process breakdown. And so those peaks were reflecting that, not necessarily a delayed and impaired PMN and N400. You can see that, and it could be, but when it gets into the clear indication of cognitive impairment, which is the N400 is quite sensitive to concussion in that regard. You really are looking at, this is no longer consistent with this person's or other people's sort of healthy N400 response. And yeah, an educated guess, I wouldn't change the record. I think the algorithm found it later, but always when you're in a clinical kind of pathology situation, leave it open in terms of the fact that it just could be a full out breakdown in the ability to be processing information in a neurotypical way, if we could use that term.
Wonderful. So
awesome.
Ryan, we've spoken about how in ECG there's assessment of the morphology of the waveform as part of the reading, and down the track as more and more people use NeuroCatch and there's more and more buy-in and there's more and more improvement in the AI. Do you think at some stage the morphology of the waveform, where it's clearly different and clearly showing some sort of pathology, will come into an assisted interpretation or a score?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you that was like a softball. Thank you for that. We are working on that now for everyone on this call. We started with doing the best job we could to define normal and healthy normal profiles. We are now getting enough scans out there that we have, we are training AI classifiers to look at, for example, features of concussion detection. So in Canada, we got the Innovation Solutions Canada $1 million grant, and we're using that to actually train for concussion exposure using AI. So that is coming in the future. Claire, do we have any more?
Well, we only have a few minutes, so I just wanted to open the floor for questions. We will be posting this meeting on our customer portals, so stay tuned for that. And as a thank you for all of you for attending, Shannon has, any of you can be selected to have like a one-on-one session to look through reports with Ryan. So she's going to do a random drawing of that right now.
Claire, this is Ben in Toronto. I do have a question for you.
Hi, Ben. How are you?
Hi, very good. I just want to get an idea of the age ranges that some of our colleagues have performed the brain scan with some of the younger generation. So what's the youngest age you would go to? Because we've conducted some scans for 9 and 10-year-olds who are athletes. And I find that some of them don't understand some of the words. So it actually skews, you could say, the measurements.
Yeah. So great question. Our indication for use is for ages 14 and up.
Okay.
But I do know that you're also not alone in scanning people who are younger than that. And I guess the rule that I would probably give you is if the cat fits and they are understanding the word pairs, it might be worth a try, but we're technically validated for 14 and up.
Okay. That's good to know as reference.
A little more context. In general, what Claire said is exactly correct, and it applies specifically to the normative reference sample. However, there are people who have scanned all the way down to 2. That's a very extreme point. There is regular scanning of kids that are sort of 5, 6, including neurodevelopmental disabilities. In general, those have been in research protocols, although they're increasingly more outside of that. The key part is when you're moving out of the normative range, the power of NeuroCatch being repeat scanning and profiling an individual across repeated scans, just because development has an impact on these things. We know that. The other thing is that in terms of understanding the words, Ben, certainly Claire or I or anyone can connect you with some of the people that are scanning in much younger populations and are having very positive successes. There is, just like everything in NeuroCatch, there's some tricks to the trade of using it that help to make that easier.
Yeah, that'll be great. And I got to say, the second challenge is just getting these 9-year-olds to sit still for 8 minutes. Oh my God. After 3 minutes, they're just looking around, and what else is there to do?
Yeah,
exactly.
So we can connect you with Dr. Sarah McCowan at UVic. She's done a lot of work in this area, and she's probably the lead. She has 4 scanners and scans a lot of children, neurodevelopmental and otherwise. So yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks. And we'll stay for a few minutes for questions, but to those of you who do need to jump at 3:15, thank you so much for coming, and we will see you in February. Tanya, it's your question.
I was just going to add to that. We've had some experience scanning kids as well, and I find it helpful to have them pretend they're on a game show, and that when they hear a louder beep or a mismatched word, they're winning the game. And I've worked a bit with Sarah, who Ryan was just speaking of, and she has a ton of experience with younger kids, kind of 5 to 13, in using a paired intervention called Dino Island. And yeah, they've got lots of really great tricks for making it easier, helping the kids stay still, and just making it fun. So yeah, that's a great resource.
Yeah, I'll reach out to you, Ben, and set that up.
Thanks, everyone. I've got to jump off.
All right. Nice to see everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, everyone.